Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Back to the TARDIS podcast, the podcast where we take a look at every single episode of the 2005 revival of BBC's Doctor Who. I'm Jeff.
I am Aurora.
And I'm Celeste.
And this week we are discussing Series 9, Episodes 7 and 8, the Zygon Invasion and the Zygon Inversion by Peter Harness. This, of course, features the return of the classic villains, the Zygons, after their appearance in the 50th anniversary special, kind of dealing with the fallout of that. It also has the return of Osgood, a extremely well-regarded speech by the 12th Doctor, and I'm going to be real, that I think that's all about what this episode has going for it. Watching this through, I kind of felt like most of it was not particularly entertaining to watch, and I think it has some pretty fucking glaring major flaws, which honestly kind of disappoints me because, like, I always really liked this episode, but oh well, I guess.
I'm the odd one out here because I really like this two-parter still. You know, we've always liked it, but I still liked it this time. Uh,
I guess
I yeah.
I guess that leaves me in the role of radical centrist because I did find flaws in this story. Mostly like moderate flaws, nothing that bothered me too much, except for one thing that I'm sure we'll get to. But yeah, I think this episode is competent at what it's trying to say, with a few missteps. Let's get into it.
I think, well, okay, so first off, I think I can point to a major problem that I have with the episode right at the very beginning, where the two Osgoods are talking, and they are basically saying that the Zygons, basically as a species, are designed to infiltrate and peacefully live among races. But it then kind of makes it essentially gives no motivation that makes any sense to the villains. And, like, so here's the thing. It is very, very obvious that this is an episode about the refugee crisis, especially in the UK and other European countries. And specifically with, like, because it would be timely, those would be, like, Muslim refugees. But the problem is that, okay, you could go that angle and then say that the Zygons, the Zygon splinter cell here are driven by religious extremism or fundamentalism or some sort of actual ideology, and they don't have any. They have absolutely none. They seem to barely have any purpose for doing this in the first place. And while the episode makes it kind of, it acts like that's the point, I feel like it fails then. It then fails in its purpose of what real world topics it's very clearly commenting on. And it also makes the actual episode not very much fun to sit through, because you're sitting here going through this being like, this is all completely stupid and pointless and a waste of my time.
In retrospect, I very much agree. This is a very quick thing. I think maybe it's just the times we're living in, but I found that taking it into, like, a more broad aspect of, like, what radicalization can, like, look like, even though, yeah, I agree, it's not as, like, pointed or as, like, deep diving as perhaps, like, this episode would be if it was truly great. No, yeah, I definitely agree that's the theme. I just think it's, like, it's sufficient. It's, like, it's not extraordinary. It's not incredible like allegorical sci-fi, but it does make sense, and I think it's the more interesting route to go with a story like this, as opposed to like immigration would be the easy one. And it kind of is still that, but it's
And like the episode, or at least the Zygons themselves, treat themselves like they are marginalized, but if they are, the episode gives very little credence to that. Like, there's a specific line, I think, where Bonnie goes like, "We were treated like cattle," and I'm like, where did they show that or mention that? Like, no, you fucking haven't. What?
Okay, so I really disagree with the idea that they don't have like a specific ideology going, because I think they make very explicit that the point is about like not living in disguise. I mean, they emphasize that repeatedly, and that's kind of like the crux of their plan, is to reveal who they really are. They don't believe Zygons should be living in disguise. They should be living as Zygons, which, is a position that obviously we wouldn't agree with as the audience, but that's why they're the radicals.
And it's
I disagree with the idea that they're like, they don't have an ideology, because there is one there.
Right, but even then, that still barely makes sense with what is put there, as a sense of this race literally has, assumingly through evolution, created a survival mechanism out of this.
Right, but it's a survival mechanism. It's not like their default state. And what the Splinter group is getting at is like, this isn't how we should be living. We should be like returning to like, return with a V to true Zygonism, which is absurd, but it is an ideology.
They also like, they just jump to like, there's the problem is that I think, okay, sure, but they just immediately jump straight to extremist violence. If there was anything that would potentially radicalize to them on this point, it's not actually shown, which is, I think, the problem of, if you're trying to do something like this, like, it's weird. There were parts of this where I felt like, despite being a two-parter, it dragged, and there were also parts of this where I felt like it needed even more time, because it feels like it just kind of starts having like already skipped parts one, having already skipped through a couple parts, because they just kind of immediately start as radicals.
I think that's okay, because sort of the point is like, the Doctor left this unresolved situation and he's coming back to it. And there's a line later about how like they've already done this before, which indicates that this has been an ongoing, persistent problem. So them starting with there already being a radical group really isn't a problem for me, because I think just, the assumption is like, this is an unfinished problem. We're seeing one strand of it right here.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels very half-baked and not very well executed for me.
This is also a problem where, like, the modern interpretation of UNIT, where it's like, it's Kate Stewart and Member Berry's the Lethbridge Gordon Stewart thing, and it's, I don't know, there's like this idea that UNIT has changed since the days of like the 10th Doctor, but honestly, if this was like, they haven't.
Yeah. And actually, I have a problem with that, because Moffat initiated the stupid fucking president of the world thing, but everyone at UNIT still treats him like he's a scientific advisor and not the commander-in-chief.
Yeah, it's muddled as all hell, but what I was gonna say is that, like, if this was, like, 10th Doctor RTD Torchwood, or if this was 10th Doctor UNIT, if this was the UNIT we saw in, like, Torchwood, with the, like, Black Ops shit they did to Tosh, like, yeah, totally, I get how this would happen, but you have that going on with this dissonant, like, neoliberal. Kate is like the proper way to wield this like power that can just unilaterally do whatever it wants with aliens. Um, it's like very conflicting mixed signals, and I agree with I think I agree that there is some ideology there of sort of in a way it's kind of doing the opposite of what IRL fascists do, in that it's like a radicalization of like rejecting appeals to like biological purity and biological norms and traditions of like, oh yeah, we can do this, but that doesn't mean we should. And yet it somehow doesn't fall into like Western Hollywood liberal degeneracy vibes either. It's a very interesting balance that it walks, but unfortunately, as Geoff says, I never really feel the venom of like why they're going this far. I just know that like reactionaries and radicals are gonna radical. Like that's as basically as much as we get, and I believe that. I live in America in the year of our Lord 2022. I believe that more and more every month. But yeah, I don't know, I'm staying the radical centrist course. I think there's some meat here. It's just it's not a 5-star restaurant steak.
It's just it's like it kind of feels like Bonnie and the crew and the entire Zygon Splinter Cell are just incredibly fucking pathetic. And if that's the case, then it feels like it should not take an hour and a half of my time for them to deal with it.
I disagree. I really disagree, because I think, so much of this episode is about how their appeals to like purity, like, racial, yeah, like species purity, pretty much, because they're trying to like return to their, quote unquote true forms, is ultimately revealed to be vacuous. And so I think that's a big part of the story, and it's a part of the story I appreciate.
Sure, but I think my point is that this could probably have been a single parter, and I don't think we'd miss stuff. Like it legitimately feels like the first episode is a lot of running around doing fuck all.
Yeah, that's my main actual complaint, is that they have a solid stuff with the setup and the premise. It's just they kind of like meander around, especially in the first half, like just like narratively holding their dicks and like not doing anything.
Like I think like I do praise two-parters for letting it like kind of soak in and get in the sauce and the atmosphere a little like a lot, but I feel like this one does that like a little bit too much for its own good.
A lot of it's artificial, and I don't get like there's like Kate going around with the police officer that's with the guy that's a Zygon, and I'm just like, what did we learn here that we didn't already know? This is basically, I don't know, I guess a setup for like
the whole point where she goes to America, and I think the only point there is so they can come in at the at the cliffhanger and be like, oh no, Kate's been a Zygon, which like honestly the effect would be similar and probably more efficient if they just went, yeah, she was already a Zygon, and just did that too.
Yeah, and
I don't feel like that would be too much of a cop-out after they did it with Clark.
No, yeah, and that's it. That's the part of the shame, is that when the episode like wants to be clever, like it can. Clearly, there's like a very poignant moment at the end of the second part that's like pretty well remembered by the fandom. It's just there's that, and then there's the whole like extended fake drama about like these trained unit soldiers who know what they're going up against getting like flabbergasted, getting like caught with their pants down by enemies and aliens that they know can shapeshift.
Yeah, I don't mind that. That's a pretty classic shapeshifter media thing of like, yeah, no, like your humanity makes it really hard for you to fire upon your loved ones. Like that bit makes sense, and I think that bit is actually pretty decent.
I think it could have been okay.
I do not have complaints with that part.
I think it could have been okay. It just went on a bit long for me. Like, how did they know which ones would be there in advance and which ones to place?
Yeah, that is true. That is
so
true.
It's like, okay.
Especially because don't the Zygons like need a link with like their subjects to actually be able to mimic them? Like, how'd they get that set up that far in advance?
Yeah,
especially considering that they were just in like some fucking like village.
Exactly.
I will say that was like the one scene that I was like, this is kind of mid.
It's like the concept is good, but the execution is kind of stupid.
I do think
in general, though. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the thing about pace. I really didn't mind the pace. I guess like I could maybe see this being like an awkward length, longer episode. I don't really agree that like I guess the Kate stuff in America could have been cut out.
No,
but
here's my suggestion. Take the Kate stuff out and like give more character moments to the villain.
Yeah.
So they don't feel or to establishing the setting.
I agree with that. I agree with that. It just doesn't bother me as much as like it's not that big of an issue for me, I think, but I could definitely see that. I do think that the Kate stuff was a little extraneous, but I can't think of much else that was really all that extraneous. I mean there's a pretty natural progression of like trying to hunt people down and moving around besides the Kate stuff.
I do think the second episode is like legitimately much better than the first.
Yes.
And I think like the only thing that like annoys me about the second episode is just Bond. Like, I'm gonna be real. I don't think Jenna Coleman does a particularly good job of playing evil. It feels kind of off.
I agree yet disagree.
She looks right. She just doesn't sound right.
I agree and disagree because I think like there are legitimately like fascist monsters in the world, but a lot of them are also like, especially like the ground level people are just like sad, like emotionally taken advantage of, like dorks. And I kind of
but also this is Doctor Who.
Sure.
This is just shit's supposed to be dumb and cheesy.
Sure, yeah. It resonated with me in people that I've seen. It was just like how the Doctor is kind of toying with her at the very end, like kind of patronizing her at first. It's like, oh, life's not fair. Kind of like making fun.
No, like that was legitimately how I felt. It's like, shut the fuck up, bitch. You fucking a piece of shit.
Yeah, and I thought for the most part that was a point that was competently delivered. At least it didn't make me like kind of cringe the way that like the way that like Matt Smith and like Mr. Clever bullshit was done. Although that's
yeah, but that's funny.
That's sure. Yeah.
I don't even like that episode. That shit's really funny.
I do think one thing what we were talking about, things you could cut. Just Osgood is fine. Just don't do a mystery box thing. I get what they're doing of like, why does it matter, like, if she's human or Zygon? Like, what matters is that they have like moral and ethical value. And to me, I'm just like, well, from a meta like point of view, like analyzing the themes of this episode, of course she's human. Because Bonnie becomes the other one. So either you have two Zygons...
No. I entirely disagree with that. I think that the continuous point of it does not matter is a good point, and it actually kind of pissed me off when 12 like actually asked at the end, because that felt out of character, because he's smart enough to know that that's the fucking point.
No, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I think extra time is wasted on that, and if you want to have it be that the point doesn't matter, then like Bonnie becoming another one, to me it's just like, well, okay, clearly because of the themes we're trying to build of like, yes, there's this radicalization element, and you know, yes, it doesn't matter which one is which, then like there's still the idea of like humans and Zygons living in harmony. So to me, the idea that like both are Zygons at the end just sort of like undercuts that last theme. So to me, it was obvious finishing it. It's just like, oh, she's human, and it's not that like her not saying, I guess, doesn't matter, but it's saying that like the fact that there's some people who might conditionally place like the value of my personhood and the value of my like expression of myself based on if I was first a human instead of, or like first a Zygon instead of something else. Like, I don't know. There's just, it's a weird situation. I just wish they didn't dwell on it as much because it basically ends up being like obvious what it is in the end.
Like him asking at the end just really felt like that felt really stupid. I'm like, why are you asking this question, dude?
Definitely him asking that was like, bro, what?
It felt very much like a moment of like the script being like,
you're
and now we need to explain.
You're literally the person who engineered this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say, just like all the stuff with the Osgood boxes though is so good.
No, I like 12's plan, and I like the box itself, and I like all of that stuff. It is literally just the problem of like how long it takes to get there, and like the fact,
the whole end joke of like, yeah, well, the 15 times before now or whatever. I was just like, that kind of undercuts the power of the moment a bit. I kind of headcanon that to be like, they haven't done this whole thing 15 times. They've just had this conversation 15 times, and he's kept resetting it.
That's what I would take.
Until...
Yeah.
I would assume they've just gotten to that from 15 times. Not necessarily there was a splinter terrorist cell every single time.
Yeah.
I don't think it undercuts it. I don't know. Like, can I ask, like... Geoff, did you like remember how this episode ends, like as you were watching it?
I remember the speech and how he eventually manages to get her to stand down, because that's obviously like the most famous part of the episode, and I think legitimately like again, I am on record, I don't like that this episode, that bit still brings it up like 2 points.
I think that might be the difference for us, because like we had totally forgotten most of the events of this episode and we did not know how it ended. And so I think maybe not having that speech in mind, like as the everything is just setting up for that, like we weren't bothered by as many things because we were just sort of like along for the like, oh, what's going to happen next ride, and we're more focused on that than like knowing where this is going. You know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we might have had like different expectations for the episode.
Yeah. And yeah, it's like, yeah, as I said, it is a like legitimately astonishing speech that feels like, you know, Peter Capaldi really truly flexing. But it's like, it's kind of like, as I mentioned, like it is literally like at that point the episode just immediately skyrockets back up, because it feels like an episode entirely built around that point, but I feel like it takes a little bit too long to get there for what is actually written in the script. And yeah, and also I think I've heard some people mean about the fact that it's basically him going on and on about the same thing over and over again, but this is actually a case where I think Bonnie sucking works, because it makes sense, because he's literally like, oh my god, you're so fucking, can you just fucking stop, please?
Yeah. I think it goes a little bit harder than it needs to at the very end, but like it's still Peter Capaldi, so even if I could nitpick that, it's just like he's still throwing himself into the entire moment. And this is one of the few instances where like having Jenna Coleman play the villain works to the benefit of the episode, because it is playing off of the chemistry that those two actors have together.
Yeah.
He
Absolutely.
really ate that whole C-nussy.
Yeah. Now, I think the rest of this episode was pretty mid, but you know what? I think the author really put his whole Peter Harnussy right into it.
No comment.
You're welcome, Internet. This is what you listen to us for, right?
The hybrid
hybrid
name drop keeps getting stupider somehow.
It's like, again, I think that I like Hellbent. I like the way this season ends. I don't hate the idea of the hybrid in theory. It's just that the way that it is implemented every single time feels like it is that, that one image that's like a screenshot from the Mike Myers Cat in the Hat movie of him standing behind the kid with the bat. That's how it feels like every single time he puts it in.
Accurate.
So true.
Also, I am a Hellbent hater from memory. I've softened my opinion somewhat over the years, but I still quite dislike it as of now. The comment that 12 makes at a certain point that like, oh, I once had my hand on a box and I knew I could talk Bonnie out of it because like she got to her too.
Yeah.
I was just like that. First of all, it elevates.
Day of the Doctor is kind of stupid, but I ain't gonna lie, that made that shit work a lot better.
Yeah, it's just like this whole season, this whole series is like teetering on like how important they're making Clara, and the
Some
way
people
it resolves.
hated that. I think it's kind of raw because again, it sets up a pride before the fall type situation with their relationship that I think works out really well.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, I don't know. It's from memory, it doesn't get too self-critical until the very end. So it's just like, yeah, I can like rely on my like overly,
I mean, there kind of is. There are some points where they very unsubtly pull the death flags, and he's like, yeah, you're not immortal, and you should really stop treating yourself like you are.
No, yeah, that those parts are good, but just let me start over. I think the idea that like Clara can influence more control through like the Zygon telekinetic link or whatever bullshit they have, which like good scenes, by the way. I think those are fine. Like that she has more control than the average person makes sense, and that she's a companion, but the way the episode kind of frames it is just like, yeah, this is Clara. She's extra special, like in and of herself. It was just one more thing that I was like, okay,
she does.
We know where this is going.
She is literally Moffat's Rose for good or for ill in all the exact same ways.
Yeah.
It's just I like the eventual end game of this more than I like the way that Rose went. Mm-hmm. Because importantly, she still has like chemistry and character with 12 instead of just it coming to a screeching halt once 10 enters the picture.
Yeah, I mean, as we've said before, I think Clara has better chemistry with 12 than she ever did with 11.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is like the inverse of the 9 and Rose thing.
And what I enjoy about it is the way their chemistry evolves a lot. It really does change.
Yeah,
absolutely. Kind of in a similar way to 11 and Amy, but there the changes felt very like disjointed and out of sequence. But the progression of Clara and 12's relationship feels very natural, and you can feel it heading towards that conclusion rather than like with Amy, where it's like, it
reaches an end point and then they just keep going.
And then it just ends at a random point after that. Yeah.
Which is funny because Clara wasn't supposed to stay, and they still managed to make it more natural than the companion that was.
She really is kind of like an anti-Amy because she has like her kind of just like unceremonious supposed ending, and then they were like, ah shit, she's good at this, and then just like kept going and made it work.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, honestly, like, that's all about that I have to say about the episode, because again, I kind of feel like the individual bits are nothing. I will actually, you know what I will say once again, I think it's really fucking stupid. Like, I understand that it is the established dynamic that whenever Unit is on screen, they basically are the Warhawks and are like, no, Doctor, we're going to do this thing that's warlike and a senseless waste of human life because we're the military, which, you know, based, sure. But this also doesn't work with you making the Doctor the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Because, like, that entire thing where she's like, yeah, no, we're going to bomb this. Like, you better be out of here in that time. Like, no, you wouldn't do that. You'd either not do it or you just physically say, no, you can't go in there. Like, that's not...
And I'm sorry, did we forget, like... I don't know if Kate Stewart was a Moffat creation or Chibnall.
Well, actually,
okay.
No, she isn't. I think she was in one of those fucking... Hold on. I think she was in, like, a fan-made thing from the Wilderness Years first, played by someone completely different. Hold on.
Our live research desk is updating.
Yeah. Yeah, she was. She was in, like, fucking, like Wilderness Years shit. That was like a fan film. That is real. It's actually kind of weird and surprising that this character somehow managed to come back, but whatever. And then Chibnall brought her back for no reason, and she's still just as nothing as she is here. I'm sorry. Kate Lethbridge Stewart is kind of just a nothing character.
She's had, I don't know, 2 good appearances minimum. I don't know. My point in bringing it up, though, is that the way she's introduced in a very bizarre episode, but still, it's like, yeah, you know, I'm leading Unit the way that, you know, my father couldn't, through science and through the way that you inspired him. And here it's just like...
And then they make her play the Warhawk in every other fucking appearance that she's in.
Exactly. And you know what? I don't inherently have a problem with that. At least
it's
not...
Harriet Jones all over again.
Well, yeah, at least not... At least not
inherently.
Yeah, at least not inherently. It's just like, if you had this arc of, you know, well-meaning person tries to work within the structure, like, and fix the systematic changes, but oops, the systematic issues fight back, and then, you know, suddenly she just gets, like...
hands.
Yeah. And eventually she's, like, warped into something, into, like, a person and a Warhawk that she barely recognizes, and, you know, that... And she's like, oh my god, you know, I'm not leading science first or whatever bullshit. Like, okay, but there's just zero self-reflection. And probably the only time I've felt that Kate's actions have been justified, I haven't revisited the monks bullshit yet, but the only other time I've felt that her response to anything has been remotely justified is probably in the Chibnall arc, because that story was so confusing and everyone was going scorched earth that fuck it, she might as well be too. So it's like, where are we at? Where are we at with this character? Nobody knows.
And then they get rid of the Grand Serpent in the same way that they deal with the primary, well, not the primary, they deal with one of the villains in Monsters, Inc. Like, just the exact same fucking way. You ever think about that?
Hey, if Pixar and Kingdom Hearts can do it, why not Doctor Who?
Okay, all right. I think that's enough. I'm ready to wrap this up. We're getting real into the weeds. Yeah, again, I think it is an episode that has a lot of problems one extremely good 20-minute sequence that somehow saves it. And because of that, I'm still only going to give it like a B-, purely because of how amazing Peter Capaldi is and how blessed we were to have him as the Doctor for those brief years before everything truly went to shit. B-.
Yeah, I'd like to see a version of the final scene where he's just yelling at his character from the Paddington films, because as far as I'm concerned, that's the same type of villain. Yeah, this story has a lot of potential that it mostly just sort of addresses in very competent, like, surface level ways. The antagonists have an ideology. We have a figurehead of that ideology. I forget if they even ever state whether, like, Bonnie is, like, the first radical or just the latest one to, like, pick up the torch, whatever. Peter Capaldi is good in it. He gets some good chemistry with Clara Oswald, of course. That's continuing to evolve, and he gets good chemistry with Bonnie, I think, because of that actor connection. Osgood and 12, we never really talked about their interactions that much.
Like, I was actually, I forgot to say, in my kind of assessment of the second episode being better, it's because I think every time Osgood and 12 are together on screen, except for that weird bit at the end where he asks which one's the Zygon, the episode goes up like 3 points.
Yeah, no, they're good. It's a very interesting dynamic where it's like, it's not like Osgood's from the future, or is like particularly like space future knowledgeable, like Jack Harkness, or I don't know, like Nardell will kind of be, or even River. She's just like a modern human who, like, because she happens to have like an unusual amount of knowledge about the Doctor, like, kind of has his number, which is very funny for a Doctor like 12. So that's good. Yeah. I think the first part of the episode really meanders a lot. I think it's trying to, like, be sort of more, I don't know, epic and, like,
it feels
action-y.
like it's trying to be like a thriller, but, like, you don't, lacking a lot of the qualities and, like, charisma of the thriller.
Yeah. Again, I get what it's going for. I think, I don't know, it's weird. In some aspects, I feel like the story is trying to be gritty, and in others, it's like an elevated sci-fi, goofy-ass concept of what radicalization is. So, welcome to Doctor Who. Take a drink. But yeah, second half's much better. I don't know. This episode is dense and not dense at the same time. Covers a lot and doesn't. But it provides an interesting discussion and insight into these topics. I think I appreciate it more in, like, a post, like, January 6th world, if anything. So yeah, it's a weak 8 out of 10.
So personally, I think this is a overall very strong sort of suspense thriller building up to the big speech. I think it has some minor flaws, but honestly, there's not much in here that's, like, super offensive to me or that really lost me. I think, maybe we could have done without the Kate scenes. I think the Osgood scene at the end is a little awkward. But there's nothing really episode ruining here for me. It's just, I was engaged the whole time. I enjoyed the whole runtime, even if, the last scene was or if the speech scene was the real linchpin for the episode. So I would really put this at like an 8.5.
All right. So yeah, next time. Oh boy, I thought this week was trash. Y'all know what time it is next week, folks. It's time for that little wacky old British man, Mark Gatiss, to walk in and be like, "Hey guys, look at my cool found footage episode." That's right, it's Sleep No More time. Wee.
No más duermen.
Be ready. Let's check in next week for when we all lose the will to live. Until then, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at B2TARDISPod. You can support the podcast on Patreon for a number of benefits, such as early access to episodes, the ability to listen in live to episodes being recorded, and potentially even the ability to guest star upon an episode of your choosing. I'm Jeff. You can follow me on Twitter at WheatleyDL.
12 dead names of Zygon. Stay woke. You can follow me on Twitter, @ofmiceandfems, for all your mediocre shit posting needs.
I'm Celeste, and I've been high on Xanax this entire episode.
Yeah, all right. Fair enough. And we will see you all next week.